Hello, my name is Nate Lawson. I'm the director of biomaterials here in freezing cold Birmingham, Alabama. I'm excited to be here. I found out there's a lot of people watching this live. I know some of you might be watching this recorded, but I like it's nice to know that there's live human beings watching me make any mistakes. It adds like a level of excitement for me. Sometimes I like do recordings and I'm talking to a screen and there's nobody live and I can edit out my mistakes and that's that's less fun. So my topic for today is bioactive composites. So I'm going to be talking about not just the clinical aspects of these, but I'll also talk a little bit about a decent amount about the research, and that's just by the nature of what I do. So I am a general practice dentist, but I also do research, and I'll tell you more about that. I forgot there's one little thing I do have to disclose. That's my disclosures. So this lecture today is sponsored by PulpDent. So there's no hiding that. I'm going to be talking a lot about the material Activa, which is made by PulpDent. So I'm not trying to avoid that. But I do do research with many different manufacturers. You can see all the ones on the screen. There's probably some others that have done research with, over time. Even before the ones listed on the screen. Sometimes companies pay me to do webinars like what I'm doing for you tonight. But I always like to think that I'm not going to say anything that's like just because I'm paid to say it, because then no one else would ever want to do research with us or work with us. So yeah, you're going to hear a lot about their particular material, but it's all stuff that I had to feel comfortable enough saying that I'm not just being paid to say that, if it makes sense. Okay. So yeah, this is my life. I was today just I had to leave some of my students in the lab this afternoon because we were making bond strength specimens, and I had to be home on time to do this webinar. But I spend a lot of my days in the lab with my residents doing testing on dental materials. So we do mechanical and physical and adhesive testing on different types of dental materials. We have a 2-year biomaterials residency program. If anybody's interested, you can apply on PASS. It's a 2-year program. We take dentists, mostly dentists from all over the world, come and they spend 2 years with us learning how to test and evaluate dental materials. Many of them go on to do clinical programs, in the U.S. afterwards. But it's always, I don't know, it's the joy of my life getting to work in that lab with all of our residents and do independent testing on dental materials. So a decent amount of what I'll show you, some of what I show you, a good amount of what I show you will be some data that we've collected in our own dental laboratory. So this is our lab here. This is my current group of residents. That good-looking gray-haired man right there is downstairs in my living room watching television. That's my dad. He volunteers with us. And my parents are going to be watching our kids. My wife's out of town. So hopefully you don't hear 2 little children barging in at any point in this webinar, but Dad's supposed to be down there keeping guard from when my mom brings these kids home, and they're going to be watching them tonight. All right. Here's the outline of what I want to talk about today. Bioactive materials. It's funny, like, what is this? This is 2025. So like maybe 2021 or 2019 or like, yeah, probably like 2019, bioactive was like the word. Everything was going to be bioactive, and it was a big trendy word for marketing. And then there's a lot of problems like trying to figure out what does bioactive actually mean. And so I'll share a little bit of information about what does it mean to be bioactive. I'll share some clinical advantages of, in my mind, of using a bioactive material. And when it makes sense for me, I think clinically to use it. And then specifically the material Activa, which is the material we're talking about, is like it's a dual cure bolt fill material. And I'll talk more about what that means and why I like using dual cure bolt fills in general, not just Activa, and not just bioactive. Any kind of dual cure bolt fill material. There's one issue that people don't talk about, I don't think enough, about using dual cure bolt fill materials, which is that they have problems with bonding to universal adhesives. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then at the end, so like there's the original Activa material that came out, and then they had a new version of the material that's come out that's a little more flowy. It's for bulk. I mean, they call it like a bulk fill material, even though the original Activa is bulk fill too, but this one just flows a little bit more. And so I'll talk about, when does it make sense to use the original version versus their newer version of the material. Here we go. So science behind this this term bioactive. So there's a period of time when I was on like the Council of Scientific Affairs, and we put out this newsletter, or the survey rather, the ADA Clinical Evaluator Panel survey, and we had like 400 people respond to try to say what do clinicians think bioactive means. I feel like there was I mean we never got a really clear answer. I feel like there's a lot of confusion. What does it mean? So there's this really neat consortium of people that meets. It's every year. It's usually up in Dalhousie, run by someone named Richard Price, who's a big expert in actually dental curing lights, but he gathers some of the big dental materials minds in the world and has these conferences, and he has every year usually has a subject or two. Like recently, some of the subjects have been like 3D printing. I wasn't able to go this year, but they talked about like 3D printing this year. But around this, I don't know, this was probably around 2018 time. The conference was held, and the whole topic was going to be bioactive materials and what constitutes a bioactive material. So these are all these, this is a representative group of some people that are there, and they come in the meeting. So what is a bioactive material to a dental materials researcher? So this is like not supposed to be marketing. This is supposed to be what does a dental materials researcher come up with? And so in that 2018 consensus, that time was actually in Oslo. I just remember that because I had just proposed to my wife in Paris, and I went straight from there to go to Oslo, and my wife didn't say yes. She just said maybe. So I had the whole time I was sitting in this conference just thinking, what's she going to do? Like, is she going to marry me? She did eventually. But anyhow, so we're in Oslo, and bioactive is, in that conference, we came out of it and said, bioactive has been defined by these 50 key opinion leaders, the material that, in addition to its primary function, so like if it's composite, meaning it's like strong enough to like fill in the tooth, of restoring or replacing missing tooth structure, it actively stimulates or directs specific cellular or tissue responses, or both, and can control interactions with microbiological species. So that was a lot of people coming together trying to come up with some generalized definition that made everybody happy. They later on went to go try and some of the people from that conference went and put together this FDI, World Dental Federation policy statement, something more official, that read that bioactive restorative materials should have beneficial desired effects. These effects should be local, intended, and non-toxic, and should not interfere with the material's principal purpose, namely dental tissue replacement. That one is like a beneficial desired effect. Maybe that's even less clear. This is maybe one of my favorite definitions that I felt was really straightforward. It came from the Journal of the Dental Association Foundational Science, which is this editorial from Jack Faircane, who's one of the people who's always at this conference, one of my big heroes in dental materials research. And he said in this editorial that the definitions described by the consensus and the FDI defines materials that generally fall into one out of three categories: something that mineralizes, something that's antimicrobial, and something that's anti-biofilm. And I was like, finally, this is a definition that I really like. It's either something that, releases some type of ions to help mineralize the surrounding tooth structure, something that can have some type of antimicrobial effect, like fluoride can be antimicrobial. You've got things like quaternary ammonia compounds that have a charge that are antimicrobial. And then you could have things that are anti-biofilm. So like maybe it's got some type of surface texture on it that prevents the biofilm from sticking, or some type of small molecule release that prevents biofilm from sticking. So those are like three different categories that a bioactive material could fall into. So I would say Activa bioactive restorative material is an anti-biofilm, or at least it doesn't propose to be. It could fulfill these claims through both mineralizing and antimicrobial properties. So what I want to go through next is show you, just to prove I was there. There's me. you can't. Oh, you can see me. There's a video on, so you can confirm that the little video looks like that little head. Okay, claims for bioactivity. To show that Activa could be bioactive. So if we go back just a slide here, mineralizing. So mineralizing, in my mind, could either mean that your restorative material can, if there's demineralization next to it, it can help remineralize that demineralization. Alternatively, it can also mean prevention of demineralization, meaning like you have a filling material and you've got acid in the neighborhood that wants to come demineralize the tooth structure next to your filling, that the release of ions from that filling material can help protect that surrounding tooth structure from becoming demineralized. So they're two different things: the prevention of demineralization or remineralization. And then the last is antibacterial, just like killing bacteria by things they released or things that are on them. And in the case of Activa, probably things it releases. So here are some studies to show first of all, that the material can prevent demineralization of surrounding tooth structure. So this study used an in vitro model with class 5 cavities. So basically, they got extracted teeth, made little class 5s in them, so little boxes in them. They put the Activa material and also a conventional composite and also RMGI into those little boxes. Then they were exposed to a multi-species cariogenic biofilm. So they try to grow caries by putting these teeth in an environment with some bad bacteria. And then they cause demineralization. And the amount of demineralization at the margins of the fillings was measured using this transverse microradiography. So looking at mineral content loss through x-rays, essentially. And what they showed, what you can see in the pictures, is the ion-releasing material significantly reduced enamel mineral loss, supporting the potential to prevent secondary caries. So in the pictures, you can see in the regular resin-based composite, right next to the filling, you see those radiolucencies. Those are areas where mineral loss has occurred next to a regular filling material. Where you look at RMGIs and the Activa materials, particularly the original Bioactiva, where next to it you don't see any dark areas. Around Activa Presto, which was like their light cure only version of the material, I guess it showed a little bit of demineralization, but not as bad as a traditional composite. So that is the one evidence that it prevents demineralization. This was our study from Chenta Huang, who was one of the residents in my program, who's awesome. And Chenta did the study where he got extracted teeth and he put fillings in contact with the root dentin. And then he put in an artificial caries model. We didn't use bacteria, we just used acid. So we did 30-day acid solutions and 30 days, on and off with acid. And then he sectioned them and he looked at the interface between the restorative material. So in these two pictures, the top part of this, the top part is the restorative material and the bottom part is the root dentin. And what he showed was that for the regular resin-based composites, so this here is the root dentin, up here is a regular resin-based composite. So this area where you could see a color change, that's not enamel and dentin. This part here, this is all root dentin, but the part where it's kind of yellowish in this different hue, that's demineralized root dentin. And what you can see is right next to the regular composite, there's an area, what we call a wall lesion, where there's more demineralization, like the demineralization is going deeper towards the pulp, like deeper towards the right-hand side of the screen, next to the composite. Whereas when we looked at the Activa material, the bioactive material, you didn't see any wall lesions. Some of the specimens, you could even see a slight bit of protection, like where there'd be less demineralization near the restorative than away from the restorative material, but at least we saw prevention of wall lesions for sure. So this is more evidence that, these can prevent demineralization of surrounding tooth structure. All right, the next thing is evidence for providing remineralization, meaning like you've got a tooth preparation and maybe there's some recurrent caries or affected dentin on the bottom of your preparation. And so you put your restorative material on top of there, and if it can release certain ions, like in the case of, I should have mentioned this previously, Activa releases calcium and phosphate ions, so those can help to remineralize the tooth structure underneath them. So that probably would have been a good thing to have mentioned earlier. You live and you learn. All right, so here's a study to show that. So here in this study, what they did was they took some extracted teeth and they put Activa on some of them. They put Composite on other ones, and they then sectioned the teeth, and they tried to see if, using this technique called energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy, which is just a little add-on that you have on your SEMs, which can detect elemental composition of things. They tried to see if the tooth structure underneath Activa or regular Composite had more or less calcium and phosphate in them. And what they showed was that the tooth structure underneath Activa showed a higher percentage of calcium and phosphate than tooth structure underneath regular Composite. And so the implication here was that there was calcium and phosphate release from the Activa that was absorbed into the underlying tooth structure. This is a different study where, in this study, they actually used demineralized dentin that they put the restorative materials on. So 10 non-carious molars were sections, and the dentin surface were partially demineralized with phosphoric acid. Samples are divided into 4 groups: Activa, Beautiful, Glass Ionomer, and a control group with no restoration. After a 4-week storage period in saline, the specimens were analyzed using that same energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy to measure the amount of calcium and phosphate and the hardness. Results indicated that Activa Bioactive restorative material had the highest percentage increase in both calcium and phosphate and increase in hardness. So, like if you look at these graphs over here, in order they go Beautiful, Glass Ionomer, Activa, and the control. And so you can see, honestly, the cool thing was all of these materials, it seemed like to an extent, could increase the amount of calcium and phosphate underneath the, on the underlying demineralized dentin, and they can also improve their hardness. So that's the remineralization claim. And then there's one more here. And on this one, what they did is they took the Activa Bioactive restorative material and a traditional composite, and they put them on top of demineralized dentin specimens that they demineralized using, it says here, demineralized using EDTA, which they said removed the mineral phase up to 50 microns. So these specimens were then exposed to, they had the restorative material put on top of them. They were put in saline solution. Same EDX was used to look to see the amount of calcium and phosphate on the underlying dentin. And so essentially the surfaces that were exposed to Activa, the surfaces that were exposed to Activa saw an increase in the amount of calcium and phosphate, whereas the ones that were not exposed to Activa, or those exposed to just regular composite, didn't show any signs of remineralization. So I know this is kind of boring, but this is just 3 studies in a row that showed similar things. That the first one showed under non-demineralized dentin, the second one showed under demineralized dentin, that when you put this Activa on top of it, you could show increases in peaks of calcium phosphate in the underlying dentin, implying that some of the calcium phosphate released from the restorative material gets absorbed into the tooth structure underneath it. So I guess I could have just said that, but I felt like showing some of the studies gives it a little bit more clout, I don't know, just more validity or science. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is the antibacterial mechanism of these, or not mechanism, but evidence for antibacterial nature of these materials. So there's just these two studies I want to show you. So this one study showed that Activa, as well as a silver-containing glass ionomer material, could both show kill zones on a disc with strep mutans. So essentially what they did is they had a petri disk, they put strep mutans on it, they put little discs containing Activa or this Keytech silver, and then when they took the discs off, you could see the little areas where there was less bacteria there, implying that the contact with the glass ionomer of Activa could kill some of these S mutans. And then this is a different study where they also looked at the antibacterial activity of Activa with strep mutans, and what they showed was that Activa demonstrated a significant antibacterial zone. Not where is Activa on this? It's right here, Bioactive. So not as much as some of the other materials, but definitely more than the control group. So just more information that this material could be antibacterial. All right, on to some more fun things. So some clinical advantages of using a bioactive material. So I guess right away, for some reason, this is the way I feel like explaining this, is that right away, when we talk about bioactive materials, another bioactive material that's really great to use in a patient like this would be resin-modified glass ionomer. So when a patient like this is generated by AI, so I'm not violating HIP or anything. I just asked ChatGPT to make a picture of a guy that looked like he had a lot of plaque, and an older guy, a guy that had xerostomia and a lot of plaque in his teeth, and they said for some reason it was giving me problems of they wouldn't show him smiling, so that was the best I could do. But on the other side is one of my real patients. This guy is an older guy that's got xerostomia and super high carriage risk and all this plaque at the gum line. So all this carries down to the gum line. And a patient like that, with all this carries down the gum line from plaque on the gum line, my restorative material choice would be probably to use something like resin-modified glass ionomer, because he's so high carries risk, and it's so hard to isolate down there at the gum line. And so if I have these caries that are down the gum line and the posterior particularly, it's very hard to isolate. I don't know how deep in the gums these are going. I feel like resin-modified glass ionomers are at least a great way to restore these teeth. And if they chip or break over time, we could look at doing something else, or maybe just replace them if they last 4 or 5 years and they were to wear down. I could always replace them, because these are hard ones to treat, because it's a gum line and there's blood and saliva and everything. So just while we're talking about using resin-modified glass ionomers or restored materials, this is my little trick with RMGIs. That's the caries in the gum line of some of these patients that have these rampant caries. Is you're prepping out the buccal and you're like, this won't be so bad. Not that so the gum line is not that fun, but it's not so bad. And then you start to see the caries go mesily, and you're like, ugh. So you start taking out mesily, and you keep on going. And you're like, am I ever going to get clean margins? And you're just like, oh my God, this is wrapping around to the lingual almost. And then how am I going to restore this? And there's this I like using this little, I call those apple core preps, because it looks like apple core and you're done, but just using a little bit of clear Teflon tape, Mylar, sorry, not Teflon, Mylar, clear Mylar strip, and pulling it around the tooth and hugging the tooth palatally, and just squirting the RMGI material in interproximally. And yeah, you're going to have a big buildup of material buccally, but at least your interproximal surfaces will be clean, and you just kind of use a needle-shaped burr to clean up everything buccal. That's my apple core RMGI method. But what if your patient looks like this? See, they let me make ugly teeth on her. I don't know why they wouldn't let me make ugly teeth on the other guy in ChatGPT. But when I have a patient that comes in like this, that has caries, Yeah, there's some at the gum line, but I'll show you the rest. This is a real patient. I mean, that's ChatGPT. I didn't know HIPAA of ChatGPT, but the X-rays belong to a real human being. A patient like this, and she really was a younger girl, and I'm like, I've got rampant caries here, but there's also a lot of structural need to replace the structure of these tooth. And like glass ionomer to me is not the material to be doing, class 2s with. It's great for like gum line class 5s, but for, class 2s, big class 2s, it's not the structural material of choice that I would use. And that's for some of these reasons I'm about to show you. This is data from our lab. So as far as wear, when we tested and published some data on wear, here's the wear of composite, much lower than the wear of glass ionomer materials. It's like 10 times less. It's like way less than the wear of glass ionomer and resin modified glass ionomer material. And you can see Activa when we tested it, and how mechanically wise it behaves basically like a composite. Not pretty much like a composite. Yeah, because you can see here as far as strength. I mean, maybe it's not like the highest flexural strength, which I mean, Filtech Supreme is usually when we tested one of the highest flexural strength composites we test. But Activa is right up there with the composite and like the over 100 megapascals of strength. Whereas resin modified glass ionomer, it's not something I would use in the posterior to replace marginal ridges. We did a clinical trial one time with a material that was it was basically a modified resin modified glass imomer, placing in big posterior restorations, and it was not, some of them held up, but a lot of them fractured like this. So it's not my favorite material for large load-bearing restorations is, like a glass ionomer or resin modified glass ionomer. Great at the gum line, love them at the gum line, not as much for posterior load-bearing restorations. All right. So now I want to talk a little bit about so Activa material. One time I did a similar webinar to this, and somebody was listening to it. One of my friends asked me, like, how much do you get paid to say that, because he said Activa so many times. But I don't mean it like that. It's just kind of a unique material. So I don't know. I can't really generalize it and say, oh, the bioactive material, that doesn't mean anything. So I just say Activa. So it's a unique material. And one of the things I like about it is it's a dual cure bolt fill material. And so I just love dual cure bolt fill materials because they've got this kind of unlimited depth of cure. So if I have a large filling that's, somewhere in between a filling and a pore buildup almost, probably should be a crown, this is great because it saves so much time in filling it in. I mean, even as a medium-sized restoration, the other nice thing about doing this kind of dual cure, bolt cure is that I don't have to worry about voids between layers. And when I used to hear voids between layers, I was imagining like these little voids, microscopic voids between layers, and I thought it just was marketing. People being like, oh, I don't want to get, look at bulk fill. It eliminates, gaps between margins because, these microscopic gaps you can't even see. Now, really, when I use a material like this, you take the matrix band off and you look at like your box and your preparation, and it's all just like this mono block of just like all, tooth and restorative material. It looks so pretty. And then, sometimes I like layering. I still layer composites as well, but sometimes when you layer composites, like today, I was sitting in the lab making specimens and packing packable on top of other layers of packable, and like you do get voids sometimes, and you get little, it can definitely happen. And so that's the nice thing about dual cure bolt fills is there's just no voids. Everything is just this mono block of tooth and restorative material and tooth. Yeah. So what is it? Why is it got an unlimited depth of cure? Because it comes out of a dual barrel syringe. So this is what the material looks like. Behind this packaging, there's two barrels, and you got a little plunger you push in, and then the two components gets mixed together in this swirly little tip, and it comes out this neat bendy little metal tip. And so because two things are mixing together chemically, there's a chemical cure mechanism of this material that makes it a dual cure material. So it's got this unlimited depth of cure. So yeah, I'll use it for something like this, where not only is it that filling this in can take a while, with traditional layered composite because of the layers you need to do, but also, like I said, sometimes you take that matrix band off and things just aren't as adapted. You see a little void area, especially if it's a margin. It's super annoying. So that's just a nice thing about doing this in one kind of large bulk kind of fill. You do your occlusal anatomy is not going to be spot on. You always have to adjust that, but and then even like look at the margins. And I'll talk a little bit about shrinkage stress, which you might be thinking, you lazy guy, yeah, you're doing this all in bulk. That's not right for margins, but I'll talk about that in a second. Well, like 3 slides. Here's another one. Dad wouldn't like me saying this, but this is his tooth. This is Dad's tooth. He fractured this cusp off his amalgam. I thought this was going to be just something temporary. You see, I don't have good contacts. I was thinking I didn't want to have great contacts. I thought I was going to do a crown prep on this afterwards, or at least an onlay prep. And that was ADR meeting in New Orleans when this tooth broke. So that was that's over 2 years ago. Maybe coming up on 3, something. Maybe it's just coming up on 2. I don't know. Here's another one. This tooth next. So the story behind this tooth is I wasn't even really going to restore this tooth, but this tooth next to it, where you can see this little bit of amalgam, was a tooth that we were going to enroll in a clinical trial. In order to enroll this tooth over here in the clinical trial, I had to have a tooth next to it. So it's like, in order to get this patient in the clinical trial, I had to build this tooth up into at least something to start the clinical trial. So I thought, I'll activate caries, I'll build this tooth up, and at least if it can at least last, a year or two, then I can at least have justified putting the tooth next to it in a clinical trial. Well, after baseline 1, 2, 3 years, at least I got pictures of this thing holding up in it. These are these like Activa teeth, these teeth that are like, build up teeth out of nothing. And I'm always amazed at how well they can stay together. All right, so the shrinkage stress thing. So how do we deal with the shrinkage stress issue? So there's this little neat trick with dual cure bulk film materials where what you do, the way you use them is you insert them in the bottom of the floor of the preparation first, because that's how gravity works. And then that part is the part that gets chemically mixed up first, like just because it's coming out of the mixing tip first, and then it hits the floor of your preparation, and then you go up and you fill up all of the rest of your preparation. And what happens is that, when things chemically cure, they cure towards whatever surface polymerization starts at. So because the chemical cure, the first part that gets chemically cured is down on the floor of your preparations, things can shrink down towards the floor of your preparation. When you, the other way you can do things is you can fill things and light cure them. And when you fill things and light cure them, then things start curing wherever polymerization starts, and polymerization starts where the light first hits the restoration, which is the top, and things cure towards the top of the restoration, and then they can pull away from the floor of your prep. So one of the little things with the dual cure bulk film materials, a little trick with this, is that you want to let some of the chemical cure mechanism occur before you hit it with the light, because that does 2 things. One, that allows the material to kind of like cure towards the floor of the preparation, because that's where polymerization starts. And if you hit with a light, then it could cure in that direction. But if you can let it chemically cure first, then it can kind of cure down towards the floor of the preparation. And also just in general, letting it chemical cure versus light curing. Chemical cure slower, so it's more times for molecules to align to resist shrinkage stress forces, as opposed to curing with the light like very quickly, and things have to arrange themselves very quickly, and they might not form an ordered arrangement such that they start putting tension on your, putting shrinkage forces on your restoration and on the tooth preparation. So the clinical trick there is to insert it, wait 60 seconds, and then hit it with the light. This is data I wish we could do. This is my favorite test to measure shrinkage stress, and this is done in University of Washington, where they've got this cool OCT, where it's like an ultrasound for like looking inside the stomach of your restoration. So this is what you see here is like a simulated class 1, and you saw them pack a regular composite in there and then light cure it. And after light cured it, you'd see this little gap forming between the floor of the preparation and the restorative material. If you use, here's an example of a dual cure bolt film material. You can see I'm squirting it in there, and then they're gonna wait 90 seconds and then cure it, and then the rest of the video is super boring because the little micro gap never happens. Here, I'll fast forward it so nothing happens. All right. The next thing is bonding to dual cure bioactive materials. So bonding to these dual cure materials, the first question is, should I use a bonding agent with Activa? And the answer is yes, you should use a bonding agent with Activa. So, I mean, there was a clinical trial, I think, that kind of proved this, but also here's some laboratory bond strength data. AB only and AB SBU. AB only means the bond strength to dentin without using an adhesive with Activa, and you can see the bond strength 4. AB Scotch Bond Universal shows a bond strength of 29. So you should use a bonding agent when you're using Activa. And your next question would be, well, if I use a bonding agent, can this still be bioactive? Can can you still get ions that come out of that Activa material to help remineralize the tooth structure? The answer is, well, when we tested this, we didn't do anything. Chanta did all this. I just asked, I don't know, just helped him. I don't know what. He did all this work. So when Chanta did this work, what he did was he had some specimens where he applied bonding agent in his preps and some where he didn't apply bonding agent in his preps. And when he did not apply bonding agent in his preps, he saw the wall lesions where there's more demineralization next to the restorative material. As in comparison, when he used an adhesive, he actually saw slight, what we call zone of protection, where there's less demineralization next to the restorative material. So Activa does better with the bonding agent as far as bond strength and even with its bioactivity or prevention of demineralization. All right, there's another issue though with dual cure bolt film materials and adhesives. And it's not just Activa, it's many dual cure bolt film materials. And that is that, well, actually Activa doesn't have this problem, but many other dual cure bolt film materials have this problem. And that is that the chemical cure mechanism of dual cure buildup materials is inhibited by the acidity of single bottle self-adhesive bonding agents. So in other words, that means is when you, in this cartoon, when you apply that blue bonding agent, the bonding agent on the tooth, it's slightly acidic if it's a single bottle self-etched material, like many of our universal adhesives that are very popular in the market. They're all single bottle self-etched materials and they're acidic. And so the acidity of that bonding agent can prevent the polymerization of your dual cure material, so you don't get a bond here and you get a debond, which is a big problem, not good. And like I said, this isn't just like this is a niche thing. Like if you look at these bonding agents here, like Prime Bond Elect, Adhesion Universal, All Bond Universal, Scotch Bond Universal, Clearfield Universal Bond Quick, all these universal adhesives that are very, very, very popular in the market are all slightly acidic. So they're all capable of inhibiting the polymerization of our dual cure material. So this isn't just an Activa thing. This is any of your, buildup materials could be inhibited by the acidity of the bonding agent you're using. So we did this test. Again, when I said we didn't do this. Zach Green, who was a resident in our program, did this as his master's project, where he looked at a whole bunch of different dual cure materials and tried to see which ones were inhibited by a universal adhesive, like in this case we're using Scotch Bond Universal. So what you could see is there's some of these materials, when you let them cure in their light cure mode, which is the dark bar, they had not good bond strengths. if you light cured them, so that's like if you had a dual cure material, like a dual cure buildup material, but you light cured it, things could be okay. But if you relied on its chemical cure mechanism, then it didn't have a good bond with the underlying bonding agent, or the, and so essentially the bonding agent that's on the tooth. So that means that, like, let's say you've got this big prep, this big prep, this big deep prep, and you're like, oh, because I got a big deep prep, I'm going to use this dual cure buildup material or this dual cure restorative material and squirt it in there. I will cure it from the top and the end, but I know it's really deep, so I'm just hoping the stuff down on the bottom layer cures from a chemical cure mechanism, and that's relief I'm getting that I'm using by using a dual cure restorative material. The problem is, if that dual cure restorative material is not compatible with your bonding agent, you won't get a good bond. So that's what I'm saying. There's a couple of materials that have the dark bars. These dark bars are good, meaning that they can be compatible with something like Scotch-Bond Universal, even if you don't light cure them. So that's where Activa does really well. There's another one called Evanesce Bulk Fill, which is another dual cure bulk fill material, but the Activa is a dual cure bulk fill material that seems to be compatible with universal adhesive like Scotch-Bond. So that's good. All right, moving on to the end of the presentation, I want to talk a little bit about some clinical placement tips of these materials. So, like I said, so there's the original Activa restorative material. That's the one that's in a red packaging. And then there's a new one which comes in an orange packaging. I always forget what it's called. Activa Bulk Flow. And what's the difference between the two of these? Well, this one's a little bit thicker, and this one's a little bit thinner. This one's a little bit more viscous. This one's less viscous. So the red one comes out of a gun. Like, it comes out of, you use a gun, because pressing out with your fingers, for some people, it's hard to do. For me, I mean, I'm not just joking here. Really, I'm so strong. Well, that part I'm kind of joking about. But I am strong enough that I can use the plunger and I don't have to put it in a gun. It kind of hurts my fingers a little bit, but I hate having to use a gun, so I will just put the plunger in there and push it out with my fingers. But it's harder. The orange one you can push out with your fingers. Even if you're not as strong as me, you could probably push it out with your fingers. You can see the video, so you can tell that I'm kind of joking. I'm not very strong. I think you can see that in the video. All right. The consistency of the material is thicker for the red one, meaning it stacks up a little bit more. So, it's kind of more like a buildup material. If you think of buildup materials, you kind of want to squirt them in there, and you want them to have a little bit of body so they just don't slump everywhere. So the orange one is a little more flowy. So that's oftentimes we like, when we like flowable composites, like when we're doing like down on the base of a class 2 or anywhere where we're just trying to get the filling material just to adapt really well to the preparation. So I think about using the red one anytime I need a little body, and then you could use the orange one when you want it to flow more. So the orange one could be like in the bottom of a class 1, I guess, or in the, where you could just have it kind of flow everywhere. You don't need it to stack up so well, just adapt really well to your preparation. Or like down on the floor of a class 2. I think this is what they developed the material for, was to use it on the, like, to just do the floor of your restoration, and it can adapt really well down there, and then you could pack something more packable on top of it. And then the red one, you could use the red one. Honestly, when I use the orange one, something like this, I just take it all the way up to the top. I don't do one layer of this and then put packable on top of it. I'm just saying you could do that. If I'm going to use Activa, I'm just going to take it all the way up to the top. And I probably use more of the red one than the orange one. The red one you can use for like class 5s, because it's more like I said, it's got more body to it. It can kind of hold in place. It doesn't droop as much. Or like a buildup. It's good for like a buildup material. So I just thought I'd show these. These are some. This is like why is the guy showing these to hundreds of dentists watching his presentation? Well, I know these aren't beautiful, but these were like rescue teeth. This is like a friend of mine that I used to work with, and he just had a lot of things going on in his life, and his teeth were like his lowest priority. Is really hard on his teeth, and I built up some of it, and he didn't have dental insurance, so it was all just like pro bono,
dentistry I was doing on my friend here. And so I build up his teeth. I have these quick appointments, and I build up his teeth with Activa, and you can see this one had been survived longer. Here's how I build up some of his other teeth next to it, and it's like I'm always surprised at how long some of these teeth I can just fill up. I carve back. I don't put a lot of fancy anatomy in there, but they're just, I guess, call them Activa teeth. All right, this is the second to last slide. The last slide just picture me, but the second to last slide, I'll just show you a video of using the material super fast in 30 seconds. So you just apply some of it to the floor of the preparation, kind of overfill a little bit. You just wait 60 to 90 seconds, and then you cure it. And you can take all your contraptions off. And then this is a burr from Comet. That's a Q finisher, and it's a cross-cut carbide burr. It's got a little, looks like Ukraine with like a yellow and blue stripe on it, and it's a really nice burr for doing adjustments and for polishing. That's towards the end of my presentation here. So here, this is, well, you can already see me. This is my daughter, Alana. I can hear her downstairs. Hopefully you don't hear her downstairs yelling and screaming. But I'm glad that we've managed to keep her out of this room, at least for now. And then there's my son, Ezra. Here's my website that's got information about my speaking. If you enjoyed yourself so much, you want to see more. And this is our Instagram account. It's called Dental Tube. You might be thinking like, oh, there's a lot more people that follow our Instagram account, obviously, that know who I am. But people are like, you're one of the guys from the Dental Tube. I wish I would have known that at the beginning. I would have paid attention. Like, why didn't you just pay attention from the start? Why did I have to know that about me? But that's our Instagram account called Dental Tube. And now I'm going to somehow exit out of my screen and see if there's any questions. All right. Oh my God. I was really expecting that there'd be none and I could just go home or just go have dinner, but there's a lot of questions. All right. Let me see which ones came in first. First one is, thoughts on using Activa for core buildups. I currently use pediatric version of Activa. It's opaque white, much easier to tell difference versus the really translucent regular Activa. I think that's awesome. Like, that's a really smart. So I said that fast, and I know you guys can't read. I don't think you can read it. I can read. So what he or she says is that currently use the pediatric version of Activa because it's opaque white, which is really great. When you do buildup, I hate it when you're doing a buildup and you're down at the margin and you're like, am I on tooth or am I on core buildup? But the opaque white version is like, the kind of like how some people use the blue core buildup material. So I think that's a great idea. Why aren't you considering amalgam for these situations? You are discussing materials that are made of plastics, which introduce microplastics into the wastewater. While we have amalgam separated to capture mercury waste from amalgam, we have nothing to mitigate the release of microplastics from these materials. Yeah, you could use amalgam. You have to build in. For me, I think amalgam is great. Amalgam has been around forever, and you see those patients that had like their amalgams placed in the Civil War, and they're like still in their bowels, and then you see the composite you used yesterday, and it's already leaking. But the only disadvantage of amalgam is that amalgam you have to prep for attention. Sometimes with those class 5s, sometimes they're not. I feel like it's pretty aggressive sometimes to do the prep to get retention. Sometimes you just do a little. I don't know. Yeah, you got to prep for attention. But amalgam does have the beauty of it's very moisture tolerant. So yeah, some of these subgingival things you could use amalgam for. I don't know. You could. I'm well aware of the next comment or question. I'm well aware of the Minimodic Convention, and I feel it should be revisited. Research indicates amalgams last 3 times as long as composite restorations, except for very large buildups where they are similar in longevity. From a sustainability perspective, amalgam is still an excellent choice. Yeah, they're really fun to drill out too. I think, if we think of the future of dentistry, it's going to be drilling out composites and cutting off zirconia crowns. It's way more fun to drill out amalgams than cut off PFMs.
For the large composite restorations, are the occlusal contacts made more light? For the large composite restorations, the occlusal contacts made more light. I don't know. I'm more of a materials guy, less of an occlusion guy. Taking occlusion, like advice for me on occlusion would be probably a mistake. So I'm going to, I don't know, I'm not sure how to answer that question. Are the bioactive materials self-leveling in terms of the proximal box? Yeah, to an extent. I mean, definitely the orange one more so than the red one, because it's more flowy. I mean, it's kind of like the red one's kind of like a core buildup material type of consistency, and the orange one is pretty similar to, like, I wouldn't say it's as like flowy as maybe, I mean, yeah, it's like as flowy as like as a flowable composite. Probably on, flowable composites can range in like some having some body to some being really flowable. I would say it's on the more flowy side of a flowable composite for the orange one. Somebody said, makes no sense. If bond, then bonding agent is the sealer. What is the basis of long-term bond later versus what's the basis of long-term bond later versus a glass ionomer? What's the basis of long-term? I'm not trying to avoid this question. I just honestly I don't know if I understand it. So if whoever wrote that, if they'd like to write it again, I'm not sure that I understand the question. Next question. Also, how tight do you find your contacts as opposed to the sandwich technique of just plain unit dose resin? I've never tested it. I don't know, but I can't say with like objective certainty, but just from my anecdotal experience, I haven't noticed. Well, I mean, you did see the picture of my dad. I mean, I got a terrible contact on him, but that was because I was using a Toffelmeyer, which I almost never like to do Toffelmeyer. Usually I'm using a sectional matrix band with a wedge and a ring, and I feel like as long as I do that, I'm always getting good contacts. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, the one I did with my dad, he used 2 wooden wedges and Toffelmeyer, and my contacts were terrible. But I don't think that's the material. I think that was my matrix selection. So typically, yeah, I don't have an issue with it. How long are the materials bioactive, specifically Activa? Is the bioactivity long lasting? Can it be recharged like glass ionomers? That's a really great question. When we did our study, we were doing 4 days of remineralization. 4 hours of remineralization and then 20 hours of demineralization. But I'm sure there have been studies to look to see that. I'd be lying to you if I remember the results of the studies to look to see if Activa can recharge. From memory, I think that they can. I mean, it'd be a very easy thing to find in PubMed, just to look for like calcium and phosphate release and recharge of Activa. So I mean, I could probably look it up, but I'd be lying to you if I could tell you from memory. Next, if you want to place composite over Activa, do you etch and bond, rinse, prime and bond, cure? If I was, like I told you, I told you could do that. I don't personally do it. I just put all in one big fell swoop. My assumption would be that there'd still be an oxygen inhibited layer on top of the Activa of all the resin, because there's a lot of resin in there. It's mostly resin. That I wouldn't etch, rinse, prime, and bond. I would treat it like anything that's got an oxygen inhibited layer and just put composite directly on top of it. Unless somebody knows that I'm wrong on that, but I would just assume there's an oxygen inhibited layer. Next, if you were to use an instrument to help contour the material before you cure it, would you use bond on the instrument to keep it from sticking, or water? No. Honestly, I try just to let it sit there because I don't know that I'm really helping anything by manipulating it before it's fully cured. But I have to say, sometimes I'm just like, the dentist inside of us just can't sit still for 30 seconds or 60 seconds and let something, sit there. You kind of want to like try to adapt it. So I know I'm guilty of like taking an Explorer and just like running the material onto the margins and trying to like start to carve it out a little bit. But I wouldn't think of using adhesive while it's still kind of sticky. I mean, I don't know, or water. Yeah, you could just use it maybe dry. The next one says, "Hi Nate," and it's from Ted, which makes me think we could be hearing from Ted. Oh yeah, it says Ted Kroll, Teddy Spaghetti, the guy that got me into the original guy that got me into doing dental materials research, the author of Willipus Wallopus, a book that we read at least once a week in my household. So it's great to hear from Ted, one of my favorite people. Hi Nate, what about separate dentin replacement? What about separate dentin replacement before enamel replacement with Activa, perhaps with Theracal or Therabase? Your kids are fabulous. They need a kitty dentist. So I didn't know that you were doing that, Ted. I mean, Ted sees way more patients than I ever could hope to. So if he says something works, I believe it more than if I say something works. So that might be, what about separate dentin replacement before enamel replacement with Activa? So I don't know much about that, Ted, but I need to learn from you about that. Next comment. I use Activa in my practice, and it breaks every time when I pull the band. That's odd. I use Activa in my practice, and it breaks every time when I pull the band. I don't know. I've never. I don't want to. I'm not the type of person. I wouldn't. I don't. That's odd. I'm not sure why it would break when you pull the band out. I don't know if it's a bonding issue. Maybe if you're not using bonding agent, I can't. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. So to recap, how long do you wait before curing your composite? What's the best remedy to prevent any shrinkage other issue? So, this is not from manufacturer's instructions. I try to wait. I mean, I say 60 to 90 seconds. And so honestly, when I'm sitting there with the patients, probably means that means 60 seconds. Unless I'm really, really bored. So I think 60 seconds. Do you disinfect your prep before fill? If so, what do you use? You could use something like chlorhexidine before you put your bonding agent down, if you so choose. I don't think there's any disadvantage to that. I know it's not the topic of today's presentation. Do you think anything you can share that can prevent the occlusal and brazier area to prevent it from breaking? Do you think any you could share that can prevent the occlusal and brazier area to prevent it from breaking? The occlusal and brazier. I'm not sure. I think this is the same person maybe that mentioned that when they pull their band out, it breaks every time. I'm not sure what's going on there. I'm not sure. Which materials do you use to restore deep caries lesions? For deep caries lesions, if it's touching the pulp, I have to use a pulp capping material. So I mean, like something like an MTA, I think in this day and age is the best if you've touched the pulp. And if it's not touching the pulp, if it's just deep, I'm not a big liner person. I've just restored directly on top of that with a composite. It could be Activa, it could be, just a traditional, like flowable and packable composite. Where is Activa Flow a recommended place to use? I think I hit that in the presentation. Can you use it in a sandwich technique? I think that's similar to that previous question. Yeah, you could use it in a sandwich technique and put composite on top. So you could use the Activa, the Flow version, the bulk, whatever it's called, the orange one. Put that one down on the bottom of the preparation, put composite on top of that. Glass armor bonds a dent with no bonding agent. I use Bioactive with no bonding agent. Seems contraindicated. Yeah, I mean, there was a clinical trial that used that material without bonding agent. I think it's from Van Dyken, maybe. It wasn't so great to be used without bonding agent, but if it's working for you, is the post-op sensitivity with Bioactive better or about the same as other resins? Yeah, I can't say that I've even when we do clinical trials, it's really hard to differentiate between post-op sensitivity between two composite restorative materials. So I wouldn't say that I've noticed any difference anecdotally. And if using bonding agent, you're not using the effects of a glass ionomer. I mean, using bonding agent, not using the effects of a glass ionomer. I don't know. I could show. I mean, all I know is that when we did our artificial caries model, We showed that we saw less wall lesions when we use Activa with a bonding agent. When we used it without a bonding agent, we saw more wall lesions. And I don't know. I'm not trying to prove my point or anything like that. I just would hate to lead people astray because, like I said, they did have that one clinical trial that did not do as well with Activa without a bonding agent. So I would just encourage people to use a bonding agent with the material. I always do. It was really nice to see that when you use a material like a universal adhesive, that it didn't have any compatibility issues with Activa. So that was always good to see. So that's just my 2 cents. Oh my gosh, we made it to the end and it's 7 o'clock. So thank you for being engaged. I thought there'd be no questions. So that's pretty cool. I guess until next time, thank you everybody and have a great night.